wooden or plastic components that solve that problem of the slippery mats. And we have Great Western Trail. Stronghold Games had a great year last year. This is the other American West game designed by a European. This is a game about herding cattle from Texas up to Kansas City to ship them to San Francisco. And you can tell it was done by a European, I think, in some ways, because this game has a rondel mechanic, it has a light deck building element, and the deck building element is optimizing your herd before you deliver them to Kansas City. But several of the cattle in the herd are actually dairy breeds. I don't know why you would herd those all the way to Kansas City from Texas, or why a Holstein is considered as valuable as a meat cow as like an Angus. Anyway, really cool game though. I recommend it. Next we have Orleans, or Orleans. There are 2 boxes here, but there are actually 3 expansions and a bunch of micro expansions and the European 5th player expansion, because this is one of my favorite games. I absolutely love Orleans. It is sort of a worker placement game, but you're not competing with other people for placement spots, so I don't really consider it one. It's more of a bag building game. Your workers are all represented by cardboard chits, or if you have the meeple, upgrade meeples, and they go into a bag as you get them, and then you pull out a set number each turn, and that's what you have to work with. So you're optimizing the bag in terms of what workers go in to try and control what comes out, but in order to advance various agendas, you may have to get workers that you don't necessarily need as workers just to move their associated tracks. It's awesome. The first expansion adds a co-op variant, which is also awesome and very different from any other co-op game I've ever played. And the second expansion, which is not out in the US yet, came out at Essen last year, is also really, really good, except it adds a board that's optional that adds a lot of really confrontational options. I don't think anybody uses that. But everything else in that second expansion is awesome. Then we have La Granja, another Stronghold game, but from 2015. This is another one of my favorite games. It is themed around being a Spanish farmer. And the color palette is very light brown and light green, so it's not necessarily the most exciting thing in the world to look at, but gameplay is really, really good. It's using cards in different ways. You can place a card on one side of your farm to add new fields. You can place it on another side to add, expand your ability for raising pigs or garner an ongoing income. You can place it down at the bottom of your board to add a unique worker, which gives you a unique special ability, or you can build it or play it at the top to build these barrows that you can fill up with stuff to build a market stall, which is part of an area control part of the game. There's dice drafting. It's kind of this mishmash of a lot of different mechanisms that works really, really well. Vast, I just got this in from kickstarting the second printing. Haven't learned how to play it yet, but I'm super excited about it. This is a dungeon crawl game, but rather than having any sort of a campaign, it's played, each time you play is a unique iteration of the game. Every possible player in this game, and you can have up to 5 people play it at once, is actually playing a very different game with different goals and different mechanisms, and they all mesh together. So one player plays this knight, and she's going into the caverns to try and hunt down a dragon. So she's going around getting loot and trying to find the dragon and kill it. One person plays the dragon, who's waking up from a long hibernation and needs to eat goblins to wake up and escape the cave before the knight kills him. One person plays the goblins, who are trying to kill the knight and stay away from the dragon. One person can play the actual cave, who's playing a tile laying game, and what they're trying to do is keep everybody else from winning until they've got all their tiles out, and then they can start collapsing the cave in by taking tiles away. And if they crush everybody, they win. If you've got a fifth player, they can play a thief who's trying to steal the treasures the knight needs to upgrade. And it's fairly fragile, but keeps coming back when killed. And there are a couple more rules coming out later in the year. So that's exciting, really interesting game design. Really looking forward to learning how to play that one. Whew. A lot of talking. Okay, so over here we have Uwe Rosenberg Central. Uwe Rosenberg is kind of known for these big games, and typically you have to feed your workers. That's a big part of whatever game it is. So his most famous game is probably not on this shelf, and it's called Agricola. It's a farming game. I don't have it because he followed it up with Caverna, the Cave Farmers, which some people think of as sort of Agricola 1.5 or 2.0. So supposedly similar enough that you don't need both, and I liked the theme better on this one. So, Le Havre is one of his earlier big box games about building up kind of your business holdings along a wharf of the famous Le Havre harbor in France. You also have to feed your workers, but it has this neat mechanism where it's a worker placement game, but you only have one worker. You can send that worker to other people's buildings, but you have to pay them. Only one worker can be in any building, so you can block each other's buildings that way. And on your turn, you either move your worker, or you take one of several constantly accruing piles of goodies. Those are your options. So you can get a lot of free resources, but you have to pick which one you're going to take and which one you think somebody else is going to take, and also move your worker around to convert those resources into other resources and build buildings. It's really cool. One of my faves. At the Gates of Luoyang is another game from the same era that was just reprinted by Tasty Minstrel Games, who I guess wanted their box to fit in with these others. It's laughably huge. This box could actually be about a quarter of this size and hold the entire game. At the Gates of Luoyang is about growing vegetables and selling them at a Chinese market outside the Gates of Luoyang. I think mechanically it's less complicated than the others, but there's some really interesting economic stuff going on here, and sort of a drafting mechanism that has a little bit of chicken involved, where you end up the drafting phase with two cards, only one of which can be from your hand, and each turn that you don't back out of the draft, you have to put down one of the cards from your hand. So it's figuring out what is going to get other people to pass up what they have to take. It's a little complicated, but it's neat. The other thing that's interesting about it is that you buy your victory points with money, and the first victory point you buy each turn is only 1 coin, and any subsequent victory points purchased that turn actually cost the value that they would be on the point track. So you always want to make sure you have at least 1 coin at the end of every turn, or you're putting yourself at a big disadvantage. Caverna, this box is filled with wood. There are like 6 different types of wooden animals, 2 different types of wooden crops. There are wooden discs representing dwarves. They're short. Wooden wood, plastic coal or plastic iron ore, plastic rubies. There's so much stuff in here. And this is a worker placement game with some of the accrual of resources that you see in Le Havre, where each player has their own kind of dwarven homestead with a forest patch that they clear to put down fields, and a cave patch that they clear out to put in rooms that give them different abilities. One of my wife's favorites. Okay, breathing now. Okay, so Feast for Odin, another big game from last year, also quite large in size. While Gates of Luoyang is about 4 times too big, Feast for Odin is just big enough. That's how packed full this box is. Actually doesn't have that much wood compared to Caverna, but it has a truly massive amount of cardboard. This is a worker placement game. It's sort of famous for having something like 48 different worker placement spaces. It's not as imposing as it sounds. I think in some ways it might be a little bit simpler than these two, but in terms of understanding the mechanics, but there is a lot going on. It borrows a concept from his games, his smaller games, Cottage Garden and Patchwork, where you're collecting tokens and arranging them in specific ways on your personal player board to cover up negative points or cover up space to accrue positive points. So when you get resources in this game, you're often laying them out in the middle of your Viking village. It's some sort of like Viking feng shui thing going on. Really, really cool game. I recommend it too. All of these are good. Excuse me. Over here we have more worker placement games. This is Tricarion. Tricarion Legends of Illusion has a stage magic theme, and the art is absolutely stunning. There are a bunch of kind of variant modules you can attach to it, which all look really cool. I've only played the base game so far, but it's quite good. You have workers with different abilities, and workers that allow you to do different amounts of work at the different worker spaces, and the board is separated into different quadrants, and you all in secret decide at the beginning of the turn which quadrants you're going to send which workers to. And then it proceeds from that point as a traditional worker placement game where you're taking turns placing out your workers and trying to go where you need to go before your opponents go there, but you're locked into the quadrants you said they were going to go to. The expansion elements add special abilities you can get for your workers, special abilities you can get for your magician, more tricks you can learn. A lot of really, really neat stuff in here. Anachrony. Anachrony just came out. It's some of the same designers. Really, really cool concept. It's a worker placement game again. But it's a post-apocalyptic worker placement with time travel, and you actually, well, several of these games have a loan mechanic where you can get resources now to pay more later or lose points at the end of the game. Anachrony actually encourages you to loan yourself stuff, and you can loan yourself almost anything. And the concept is that it's like at the end of, towards the end of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I think it's the Excellent Adventure. I haven't actually seen both movies, so I can't remember which is which, but I think there are two movies. This is how out of touch I am. Where they're trying to sneak through the police station where one of their fathers works, and they say, okay, we need the keys to this room. So when we're done here, one of us needs to remember to go back in time and leave the keys to this room right behind this plane. Okay, right, remember. And they do that, and suddenly the keys are there, and they advance through the office that way. In Anachrony, you can say, I'm going to send myself some titanium from the future so that I have it now. So you take the titanium now, and then each turn you don't send yourself titanium back in time, you have a risk of anomalies opening up in your compound and causing all sorts of havoc. Also, if you got the Kickstarter or the Commander's Pack expansion, which I did, it goes from being a very flat game that's all cardboard and some plastic cubes to having really big, gorgeous miniatures for the mech suits that you use to traverse the wasteland. Really cool. And it has all sorts of really neat, interesting modules as well that I haven't played with yet. Whew. Okay, we have Argent the Consortium. This is another worker placement game. It has a very heavy anime art style, which I'm kind of burned out on from living in Japan and learning about Japanese culture for my minor before I went over there and all this other stuff. But the game is really, really cool. The theme is that you're all at a magic university, and the headmaster, I think the Archmage, has died, and so there's a line of succession issue. And I've been staring at my gut for like 15 minutes. All right, so you're each different members of the faculty who are jockeying for position. Neat aspects of it are the scoring at the end of the game is determined by how many votes you get on the voting council, and you don't actually know who's on the council at the beginning of the game. Over the course of the game, you can spend actions to peek and see who's going to be voting and what they care about. At the end of the game, those are the only resources and other actions that count towards whether you win or lose. Like a lot of level 99 games, practically everything in this box is two-sided, with different variations of the same sort of space or character and that sort of thing. So each worker has its own special ability, and there are two possible ones. Each kind of player character has their own special ability, of which there are two options. Each room has its own kind of theme and things you can do there, and there are always two options. So and you don't even use every room in every game, so the level of variation in this game is huge. It's really cool. I enjoy it a lot. It's kind of a bear to teach and a bear to play, but it's awesome. Next to that, we have Zulkin. Zulkin is it's right here. Another worker placement game. This one has a Mayan theme. It's really, really cool. Just from a design perspective, you have these plastic gears on top of the board that are intermeshed, and when you place a worker on the board, you actually place them on a gear. You don't get anything when you place them, you get things when you take them back. On your turn, you either have to place workers, and the more workers you place on a turn, the more expensive they are, or you take workers back. If you can't place one worker, even one worker, you have to take at least one worker back, because you get the resources or the actions associated with worker when you take them back, and each round the gears rotate a spoke, which means the worker, the longer they sit in a space, the cooler the things they get. There's a lot of management there, and it makes time a resource in a really interesting way that I've never seen in other games. So very cool. All right. So I think we can see the next row down. Yes, we can. So, more worker placement games over here. This is Smurg. Smurg is an unusual worker placement game because there are tiles that come out of the board that have different places you can go on them. You see that in another very popular worker placement game, Words of Waterdeep. Although, in Words of Waterdeep, once you play them, they're down on the board permanently, and players can own them and they can get resources. In Smurg, these places appear in the wildlands outside of the city. Smurg has kind of a Dragon Riders of Pern theme to it. They'll only be there very briefly. So it's almost like playing a card and trying to do it at the time that you're in the best position to actually use the new worker placement spots while not benefiting your opponents over much. Very neat. Steam Time, another one of my fave games. This kind of sort of has a time travel theme, but it doesn't really feel like time travel like Anachrony. In Steam Time, the worker placement spaces are all in bands of sort of cardboard, and they change order each round. If you go to a place lower down on the board, you can't go any place below that until the next round, so it's deciding whether, are you going to take actions on different strata, or are you going to rush up the list to get something you really, really, really need as soon as possible. Also, one of your resources that you collect are gems, and there are a bunch of gems in different colors that slot into different parts of your time-traveling zeppelins. And the more you have in any given slot, the more effective your actions are, but they're also a resource that you need to spend to do things. Very clever design. Let's see. Champions of Midgard. I waited in line for 3+ hours Gen Con 2 years ago to get a copy. This is a early release Gen Con copy of the game, and it was totally worth it. If you like Words of Waterdeep, you will love Champions of Midgard, I think. But there is a major twist to it that some people either really like or really hate. Like Words of Waterdeep, you're sending workers out to get units, and then sending those units other places to do things. In Champions of Midgard, you're actually fighting monsters, and the units that you're getting are represented by dice, and you actually roll those dice to see how much damage you do. So it's a European style game with a very heavy